I'm Roxanne Fequiere, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. Welcome to This Is How We Create. I'm your host, Martine Severin. Today we're chatting with Roxanne Fequiere about her journey as a writer. Roxanne shares wonderful tips that I've never heard before about how to pitch your work and about how to have the courage to craft a life of your own choosing. We do have adult language in this episode, so you may not want to have a listen with kiddies around. Let's get started and please enjoy. Hi, Roxanne.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. It's so good to have you here on the podcast. I've been really excited to talk with you because it's just your history, just all the work that you've been doing for the past 10 years. We met at Harvard when you were what year was it? Were you a freshman and you were working for the Crimson?
I must have been a junior because I didn't join till then. So it must have been junior or senior year.
So we met when you interviewed me. I was running my street style blog in Boston, Beyond Boston Chic. We chatted and I really just loved you and loved your spirit. You were so fashionable even then.
Oh, God, that was a rough time. 2009. Oh, God.
I've just kept tabs on you throughout the years. And thank goodness for Instagram because
Absolutely.
It allows you just to see the arc of someone's life. So I'd love to start way back. The New York Times featured you and your family, and the article that they featured was on Flag Day, Haitian Independence Day, which is June 14th.
14th, yeah.
June 14th. And so the New York Times came to your home.
Yeah.
So was this your home on Staten Island, right?
Yeah, my parents' home on Staten Island at the time had just left my job, my full-time job as a copywriter at eBay, and I went to a Galentine's Day party at someone's apartment. It was all women in the room, and it was a lot of like accomplished and stunning and intimidating women. And I had brought a friend with me for backup because I don't know that I would have been able to like sit in that room on my own. So I sat down and this woman sat down next to me and we started talking, and she didn't say what she did at all, but we were talking about, you know, the Upper West Side, which is where we were at the time, and like what the good restaurants were. And she asked me what I do, and I said, well, I'm newly a freelance writer because I've just left my copywriting role. And she said, what do you write about? And I said, oh, you know, like a kind of like an arts and culture beat, you know, anything that kind of like strikes my fancy, but I'm never like really writing about politics per se. I'm writing about like arts and fashion and lifestyle. And she was like, well, how about food? And I was like, yeah, I'd write about food. Sure, why not? And she was like, oh, well, like if you ever have any ideas, you should pitch me. And then handed me her card, and she was a food editor at the Times. And I was like, okay. And then after she left, my friend was like, that was Julia Moskin. She's brilliant. I'm obsessed with her. And I was like, I had no idea who I was talking to. Like, had I known who she was, I probably wouldn't have even said I was a writer. Like, I probably would have just kept that to myself. So then I kind of like made myself promise that I would actually pursue this. So then I kind of pitched her on the idea of doing just like a thing about Haitian food and Flag Day and pegging it to that. And then she was like, yes, but we have to work really fast because like we want to get it out on time and XYZ. And then it just kind of happened. So then because I was using my family kind of as like source material, she said, you know, why don't we just send the photographer to your house and then actually do this thing? So my aunt came over and my cousins and my mom was there, and then we basically just kind of created a feast, and then the photographer hung out and just like took photos the whole time. So it was like a really cool thing that just kind of came together in the most random, serendipitous way.
But what I loved in reading that article was all of the history, the family history that came out. Your family immigrated to New York in the 60s. Can you tell me a little bit about that story in terms of when your parents came along or why they even immigrated?
My mom and my dad are both from Haiti. Their families both immigrated to New York, but my parents didn't meet until they were in Brooklyn. So they both came around late 60s, early 70s. But I know specifically on my mom's side, my grandmother came over first, and she stayed with, you know, some distant family members and kind of worked cleaning houses and stuff like that, and was kind of earning money and sending it back, but also like preparing to find a place where everybody could come. My mom was one of 6 in addition to her father and then her mom. For a long time, there were 8 of them in what is a 3-bedroom railroad apartment in
Wow.
Brooklyn, which is still in the family, and like now is kind of like my cousin lives in the apartment where my grandmother and the entire family used to live. They've never really moved. It just kind of gets passed along to other people in the family. So yeah, my grandmother came over here and she was super religious back home and wanted to continue to be super religious over here, and was looking for a community that, you know, matched her faith but also matched her heritage. And then I think she was in Queens living with a family member, but then eventually she heard that there was like a Haitian community in Brooklyn, and that's where she ended up going. And she actually, the 2 buildings where a lot of my family still lives is next door to St. Teresa's Church in Prospect Heights. And my grandmother became super active in that church, and then like launched like a Girl Scouts troop that was like primarily Haitian girls. Growing up, they would have, you know, trips to Montreal, trips to Amish country every summer.
That
They
is
would rent buses.
crazy.
Yeah, so
That's
my grandparents were so just like into the church community
oh,
and
that's
just,
amazing.
yeah. And then that's where my mother got married. That's where my grandparents had their funerals. Like, it's just kind of like this church next door to the building where they lived was just like the center of their entire life. And then just, you know, immigration being what it was, and I guess word of mouth, there was just like this like rich Haitian community that they were kind of the epicenter of during the 70s, 80s, 90s until my grandparents passed away. Yeah.
So how did it come to be that your parents moved to Staten Island?
So when my parents met and got married, I think my mother was just kind of like fed up with the city and wanted a place with a backyard and wanted a place where she felt she didn't have to like look out her window and look directly into somebody else's house. And at the time, the way she tells it, Staten Island was still kind of, it felt like a bit of a retreat from the rest of the city. I mean, it's still suburban. It doesn't feel like any of the other 4 boroughs, but right now it very much is overcrowded. I think that there were empty lots next to my parents' house when they bought it that don't exist anymore. So my mom would often complain growing up. She would be like, I came here for XYZ and now there's like a house right on top of us. Like, this isn't what I wanted. But at the same time, she still had a house, so she wasn't complaining too much. But yeah, I think they went there to just have space to breathe and not feel they were in these brownstones that were like stacked on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided to just move over there and see what happened. And also, I think the Verrazano Bridge was built, I don't know, I want to say 70 something, right before they got married. Suddenly there was this very easy way that they could just kind of hop over to Brooklyn, which didn't exist before, actually. So yeah, a lot of people, I think, came from Brooklyn to Staten Island after the Verrazano Bridge was built.
Our listeners don't know that I'm Haitian. I haven't quite said that yet. But for me, it's always been interesting to read about the Haitian diaspora and where we all went from Haiti. My family, when we immigrated from Haiti, we went to Boston. But I think we went to Boston only because my mom's cousin was in Boston.
Yeah.
And she said that prior to going to Boston, she had thought about going to Montreal. And so I always imagine, and we have cousins who are in Paris, so I always imagine that in an alternate world, the Martine would, there's a Martine who's Canadian, one who's
it's
French.
Boston, New York, Montreal, and like parts of Florida. Like
Parts of
it's like
Florida.
all along that like eastern seaboard. My mother's childhood best friend, who is my godmother, is in Montreal. My cousin's aunt on her other side, they're in Boston. Like I've got like it's like those are like the 4 places that we went. Yeah.
It's amazing. And then we have come to find that there's a little Haitian community here in Chicago, which is where I'm currently based. It's fascinating. But anyway, you're now a writer, and I'm trying to understand like when that love of reading came in your life, or were you always just a voracious reader?
I always was. I don't remember a time when I wasn't. I'm the youngest of 3. I'm the only girl, and my mom does a lot of, which I'm realizing now, I kind of took everything as gospel that my mom would tell me, but I think my mom does a lot of like myth making in her own head. She would kind of like repeat these stories. I don't know how true this is now. She would say, you know, you were always brilliant. I taught you the alphabet and I taught you the sounds, and you just took off and you were just reading the books. You were so ahead of your time. And then she would say the same thing with piano. She would say, I taught you the 7 notes, and then that was it. Like you just taught yourself. I'll take your word for it. It's a little bit presumptuous for me to call myself brilliant, but you keep telling me that this is happening. But what I do remember as being fact is that they would give us report cards and they would say what your reading level was. You know, like 3rd grade on, it would just say 12 plus because there was nowhere to go. Like they were just kind of like, that's the level she's at, and she's like above, 12th grade, so there's nothing else we can say. Like I remember just always being obsessed with books, always with a book in my hand. Every Wednesday was library day, and I remember very quickly growing out of the children's room, moving on to YA, moving on from YA to the adult section, having librarian friends, which in retrospect should have been a tell. The librarians knew my name, and we were very friendly with each other. And then actually when I was in high school, my first and only job in high school was working at the library.
Yeah, so you were a page in the New York Public Library system.
Yeah.
I was too. I was a page.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I was a page in the Cambridge, because I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. I was a page for 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good job to have. It's quiet.
I know. You get to know the Dewey Decimal System.
Yeah. And then went on to college and predictably worked in a library. I was just kind of like,
oh, did you worked at Widener?
Yeah, no, Lamont.
You worked at Lamont, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lamont's a beautiful library. If I understand correctly, so you left Harvard, and then that's when you worked at eBay.
I had one job before eBay. It was a fashion startup that was run by a mother-daughter team. They had a couple of cameras and they would go into people's homes. A lot of downtown kids, New York City-centric staples of the neighborhood types of people talking about their style. And this is insane to me. I was 21, I had to pay rent, and I was interning full-time for no money and tutoring on the side to pay my rent because I was just so obsessed with this place and how cool it was and how interesting it felt. And then after 3 months interning full time, they got funding and gave me a salary. So then I went there full time. And I went in with the intention of doing some type of writing, but it just didn't happen for various reasons. And then after 9 months, they kind of said, it doesn't seem like you're getting the chance to do the thing that you want to do here. We would love to help you get set up someplace else. And we've been interviewing these people for years and years. Our Rolodex is your Rolodex. Let us know who you want to be introduced to. We'll make it happen. So I basically went through their entire archive of hundreds of people who they had interviewed at this point. And I picked out a few people. And one of them was a woman who had co-founded Lucky Magazine.
Wow.
And she wasn't there anymore, but I just thought that she was such a cool person and I was so obsessed with her. Her name is Andrea Lynette. She had recently gone over to eBay and she was heading up eBay Fashion, which was a new initiative that they were going to put forward with editorial aspects behind it and really invest money in making eBay feel like a place that you wanted to go to see what was going on in fashion. So I met with her and she was like, well, I have a copywriter who's leaving. Have you ever done that? Do you think you could do it? And she was like, you can do it. Literally that was it. She was like, you're smart. You can do this. Let me just figure this out for you. And she literally just made some calls, was like, can you fly to California in 2 days? And I was like, okay. And then I remember showing up with my resume thinking that I was going to interview. So I remember telling my friends and family, nothing's set in stone yet, I'm just going there, this is so cool, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then when the woman who was supposed to meet me got there, she went, welcome to the team. And I was like, oh, she literally hired me in that moment. I wasn't coming here to make my case. I am hired. I literally thought I was going for a job interview and I was going to start the job. And I was like, okay, cool. So yeah, and that's how I ended up at eBay for several years.
I went through and looked at some of the pieces that you wrote.
Yeah.
It was kind of fun. So basically in some of the pieces that you wrote, it looks like you would feature someone who had purchased several pieces at eBay and then you would hot link to what those search terms would be. So it looked like it was a cool thing, but I don't know, maybe was it sexy? Was it
No. That that was like a small part of what I did. So there was like this fashion blog and they had style stories, I think is what it was called.
Yes.
And we would do these profiles. Those were pretty standardized in that like I wasn't necessarily at the shoot. Like I would just kind of get the photo and there were these standard questions that we would send and whatever. The bulk of what I did was writing for the consumer facing side of things. And basically, like, if you go to ebay.com, even now, there's going to be like a rectangular thing on the homepage that goes in a carousel. And one of them might say, spring styles for him and her, Michael Kors, Ralph Lauren, and more. And then the thing slides. And then eBay Motors, get a set of tires for this amount of money. And then the thing scrolls. So basically, when I first started, I was writing those pieces for the fashion vertical only, which shows up if you go to eBay Fashion or if you go to ebay.com based on that week who had the real estate on the homepage. And then there were some editorial bits to it. So I will say that when I first started, it was like, next week we're talking about platform shoes because platform shoes are the thing. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about like packing for a trip to Paris and like what you can get. Now, the person that hired me, who was like spearheading all these initiatives, she left a few months after I stepped into my role. And the person that replaced her, thankfully, thank God, she was such a great boss, basically met up with me and said, I know that you're in New York, because that's another thing. The person that hired me lived in New York. The whole team was in California. She wanted somebody who was in New York so that she could just kind of be on a closer basis with them and talk to them about the copy. Now, when she left, the person that replaced her was out in California. And thank God she met with me and said, this isn't broken and I don't necessarily think it needs to be fixed. So let's keep going. So at this point, I was the only person in New York and everybody was in California. But the initiative or the new marching orders was to really become more commercial. So the editorial stuff really dropped away. Mm-hmm. And instead of sometimes saying 50% off shoes for little ones or whatever, now it was all the time doing that. So every week it was just gold necklaces, 70% off, sneakers for him, 20% off. It really just became a churn of just churning out like the most basic consumer facing copy. There was really very little opportunity to be creative. So I was at a crossroads. This doesn't excite me. This doesn't necessarily inspire me. Having come from a place where I was making not that much money and wanting to be able to have some financial stability, I don't want to necessarily like jump off this ledge and then go back to making very little money so that I can, feel creatively fulfilled. So I made a decision that I was going to stick around for the future. I didn't know how long I was going to be there at that point, but I knew that I had to do stuff on the side that was going to make me feel less that I was just kind of going through the motions. And that is why I ended up launching a magazine.
Yeah, so this is when you launched Golly, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Is it the copywriting that got you? Because I think I read somewhere where you were talking about the benefits and the downsides of learning how to do copywriting and sales. Yeah.
I think it's copywriting in certain contexts, right? Because now I'm a copywriter at the Wing and I find it to be very fulfilling and very inspiring and really interesting because we're talking to a wide range of women who are members, some of whom aren't members, are not even women. We're just talking to the world, right? And our product is not 50% off sneakers, but our product is talking about concept of community and belonging and inclusivity and like where's the line between what you can promise as somebody who has a product and what is something that like people should feel empowered to create on their own. Copywriting can be very intriguing and dynamic, but it just wasn't in this context in which I first was introduced to it, if that makes sense.
I understand. There's something that you wrote in an article. I think it was, I don't think I sourced where I read it, but it was about being Black in the workplace.
Yeah, that was about why I left eBay.
Yeah, so you wrote, of course, it's an objectively good thing that the company is working towards more inclusive on-site visuals. So I guess the backstory is the Black Friday. Mm-hmm. There was a Black Friday ad, and originally there was a black model, and you were reading a thread. I mean, you tell the story. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Why am I telling the story? You're supposed to tell the story, so please go ahead.
So basically, I mean, to kind of like move the trajectory along, I started at fashion. I ended up doing like fashion and home and garden. Eventually I ended up doing the complete opposite. So by the end of it, I was working on motors, I was working on industrial goods, I was working on like small business stuff. So it was fine. I mean, I had been there for years and I was writing about this stuff over and over again. So suddenly I was learning about like tractor pieces and stuff like that, which was like cool in its own way. So basically there was a Black Friday promotion that was just kind of like Black Friday for small business owners. Click here to learn more about financing, blah, blah, blah. Again, very rote. Like, it's not like the copy itself was ever in question. I kind of just churned it out, sent it off. There you go. And then we had this program where we could kind of like see the revisions and see all the comments that people were dropping in. And there was a comment that basically said, you know, there's some sensitivity around this, or like, we just want to be safe, but like, how do we feel about the fact that there's a black model in this like banner ad? And basically there was like a black man wearing like an apron, kind of like standing in front of like a store facade to kind of like show that he was like a small business owner. I wasn't asked specifically because this was more of a design question than anything, but I just kind of started following the thread out of curiosity. You know, the creative team wrote back and they were like, it's fine. Like, what do you mean? Like, what's the issue? And I think the answer was just kind of, oh, nothing. Like, we just kind of want to be, you know, cautious, or we just want to make sure we're being sensitive. And to this day, I don't know what they meant. Like, I really don't know if they thought that black people would see it and be like, oh, why has he got to be black? Or if they just thought that certain types of white people would see it and be like, I don't know what they meant. So at this point, I'm thinking like, this is silly, whatever, this is nonsensical. And then they kind of kept pushing back and being like, are you sure we shouldn't change it? They actually like went to like the creative director and like went and they were like, listen, the creative team has gone to its leaders and we feel fine about this. Whatever this is, enough is enough. We're not changing it. Again, I was kind of like, well, this is escalating. Like, I still don't really know what they mean by like taking out the black model, like what that would solve, but sure. And then I kind of like didn't see anything happen on the thread. But then when it actually went live a few weeks later, there was a white model. So I remember just being like, what the fuck is going on here? And I remember messaging the person who was the designer on the project. And I was like, hey, whatever happened with this? Because I just saw it go live and I saw that the model got changed. And he was like, yeah, it was really crazy. We like went and told them that the whole creative team wasn't in agreement on this, but the partner, so we partnered with another company on this like particular promotion, but the partner got wind of this and said that they didn't know necessarily what the issue was, but they just didn't want to risk it. And they basically said, if you don't change this model, we're pulling out of the partnership.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, like, well, that really got crazy very quickly. And then I was kind of like, oh, like, thanks for telling me that that happened. And he was like, you know, it's wild. I was like, yeah, it's wild. Like, this doesn't even make any sense. I'm so confused. And like, the more I sat with it, I was kind of like, I'm so sorry. Like, what the fuck is going on here? Why did we capitulate to that? Especially if like the creative team felt strong that this was a non-issue. And I had a different boss at this point. At this point, they had put in a copy director and he was great. And we had a rapport and I really liked him. And I kind of just brought it to him in one of our one-on-ones. And I was like, this really didn't sit well with me. I was like, I don't think you were involved necessarily, but I wanted you to know that it happened. He was like, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. I did not know that this was happening in this project, but I do not feel that it wouldn't be right if I didn't tell you that this isn't an isolated incident. And then I was kind of like, well, fuck, like, I didn't know that. Jesus Christ. And he was like, you know, we're trying our best. I don't want to lie to you and say that this was isolated. We do struggle with this stuff. I'm trying my best. A lot of the people in the creative team are trying our best, but these things come up. And I just want to be very transparent with you about it. In his attempt to, I think, you know, frame the problem and be really honest about what was going on, he said, we're making a lot of strides that I'm excited about, but it is really baby steps. You know, for instance, recently we had a model with natural hair make it to the eBay homepage. You know, that's progress. Like, and it is, like, objectively it is. Just hearing him say that and like suddenly having this context for the work that I was doing there and how me as a person fit in with, I guess, these like behind the scenes skirmishes that they were having about who was acceptable to like feature in our creative, it really just struck me. And we were having like a video like Skype session and I was like, back. Like, I'm crying, and I do not want to be crying
Oh
like on
gosh.
a thing, on a
Mm,
interview with my boss. But I remember just kind of literally being like, and he was like, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have used those words. I shouldn't have said baby steps." And I was like, "Nothing that you said is wrong. It's literally just the concept." I was like, "You're just reporting things as they are, and thank you honestly from the bottom of my heart for being honest about it. I'm just trying to figure out now where I fit, knowing that this wasn't an isolated incident that just kind of went awry, but knowing that there are other things like this that happen." And he was like, "I completely understand that. And I can tell you up and down the line how valuable and important I think you are to this company. But I know that it's a conversation that you have to have with yourself. And I can't convince you that you should stay in a place that is making you feel this way." So I kind of just like thought on it a lot. There were other things going on. I had been there for a really long time collecting those checks. You could stay here a long time making good money, or you could like take this as a sign that maybe it's just time to try
time to
something
move
new.
on.
And I had done all the things, on the side. Like, I had a lot of fun while like saving money and doing all this stuff. And I was like, it's time. It sucks that that was the thing that like precipitated me leaving. But like, I truly believe that I needed something like that, because like it was just easy. You know what I mean? It was easy to do that work and
Yeah.
then do stuff on the side. So like, I would have stayed there too long, I think, if this hadn't happened.
Well, I love how you wrote, I simply don't have the Teflon thick skin necessary to be part of that vanguard, knocking on doors, inquiring if it might be all right to present a black face to the world just this once. I've mastered the art of sales. I'm sorry, I've mastered the art of sales copy, but I have zero interest in pitching my higher ups on my humanity. This season, I'm removing my voice from the steady chorus of deals, deals, deals. As it turns out, the paycheck isn't worth accepting myself as a cut rate commodity. I have been like so in love with your mastery of the English language. And I think I say that
Thank you.
from like somebody who had to learn English, right? And my mother always my mother would, whenever she had to write something, either an email or a letter to her boss, she would say, "I need you to do the good English," meaning that like just being able to present yourself and using the words in a way to really emphasize what exactly it is that you're feeling. And it's
Right.
something that, I mean, in reading, just sometimes I just savor your words. Like I'll read them over and over again just because they're just so clear. It's as if I'm listening to you, but I'm in a glass dome, just it's like just
Mhm.
listening to the clearness. And it sounds like you're really good at picking exactly what needs to be said. I love that. And I've been collecting your words sentences from you for a while now, just because I think sometimes they say exactly what I'm feeling, but in a way that I wouldn't been able to say those words out loud, if
Right.
that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But
That means a lot. Thank you.
that was really that was amazing. So you left eBay, and then from there, it sounds like from then to now, it just sounds like you, from the outside, obviously, because Instagram is one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Twitter. And you have an amazing Twitter feed, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you.
Your Twitter account, you have access to the best memes. Where does she get them? They're
Oh God, I
amazing.
spend a lot of time online, and it's funny because I have like like 150 followers, so I'm literally talking to nobody. But I just like write things that just make me laugh. I'm like, no one's gonna see this, but I just
Well,
want to,
yeah,
yeah,
I've been seeing it, and it sounds like you, from eBay to now, it's just like you've been hitting it out of the park. So you've freelanced for Lenny Letter, Refinery
hmm
29, Girls at Library, the
yep,
New York Times,
yep,
Vogue,
yep,
Elle, and then the Village Voice way back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah.
So tell me how you've come to do that, because I know that in order to do that, you've had to put yourself out there. You've had to pitch. Can you tell us a little bit how you've come to understand how you need to approach the decision makers
Yeah,
to be able to gain work and to be able to
yeah.
make some money?
I've started doing this thing over the past few years where if somebody asks me to do something or if somebody asks something of me, I say yes before I think about it long enough to say no. So, for instance, that's, I think, part of why I accepted an invitation, right, to a party where like I kind of knew that this woman inviting me is like amazing and intelligent and accomplished, and probably everybody else would be just as much all of those things. So yes, that's part of it, saying yes before I can like convince myself to say no. But I'm very shy. I spend a lot of time in my head telling myself that there are other people who deserve the things that I want. There are other people who are better qualified for the things that I want. I think the first pitch I ever sent was the pitch for the story about why I left eBay. And I did that because I was in such a rage that part of my personal agreement with myself about remaining at eBay as long as I did was that I made sure that this was very much just a job to me. It was something that paid me well. I could do it without thinking too much about it. I could collect the check and I would focus my energies on doing other things, like starting other projects and traveling a lot and like having lots of fun with my friends and like all this stuff. And I did that for a long time. So when this thing kind of like came out of nowhere and really like bowled me over and I was feeling emotions and I was crying, I was sad that it was happening. I was sad at the circumstances that led to it, but I was upset because I was like, this was not part of the agreement. I was not supposed to care about this job. This job was never supposed to pierce me underneath this veil and get to my soul and make me feel less than, even for a minute. So like, I was livid at the fact that that somehow this like agreement had been broken and that I was sitting here literally crying tears over my job.
So what do you
eBay.
mean by the agreement had been broken? Do you mean, I know that you
agreement
mentioned...
with myself.
So, okay, tell me more because that's interesting. So you made this agreement with yourself, and it sounds like you make a lot of agreements with yourself.
Yes,
right?
I do.
And so
that's the thing about talking to yourself all the time.
Oh, because you're in your head, obviously.
Yeah. I think it was just kind of like, in order for you to keep this job that like at times was just kind of like mind-numbingly monotonous, the idea was that it just had to be this thing that you churn out and do, and it doesn't matter to you, basically.
But it did matter to you.
It did. Or it found a way to matter. What I thought was me simply saying 50% off this and 80% off that, suddenly when I wasn't looking, found a way to kind of like sneak around the back way and be like, actually, this is relevant to you because, you know what I mean? Like, because people like you are being told that they're not able to represent this brand. So it was kind of like I wasn't paying attention to these things that were happening in the background. I thought this was an isolated incident. And then it was like, no, dummy. You know what I mean? Like, of course this is happening, like all over the place. So I was upset. I was kind of like, what the fuck are you sitting here crying over eBay about? Like, this is not the way you're supposed to be reacting to this job. And I also felt kind of trapped because I was like, I want to leave, but like, now I don't necessarily know what's next for me. Like, how do I go about like finding a place in the world quickly? Because I want to get out of here. So I was so upset. And, you know, I had been invited to pitch at places, and I had actually applied for a job at Lenny a few months prior, or maybe like half a year prior, and I didn't get the job, but they said, we loved your stuff that you wrote and the ideas that you put in your application, so feel free to pitch. And this is something that would happen to me quite often, but I would always think, they're just saying that. You know what I mean? Like, that's a nice way to say you didn't get the job, is that they still want to, like, people would tell me to pitch, and I'd be like, yes, obviously, you'll hear from me so soon. I'd never pitch. I would just be like, that's a thing that people say to be nice. They don't really want to hear my ideas. So I was sitting there on the couch by myself, really upset, and it just occurred to me, I don't know, something clicked. And I was like, maybe you could write about this, because like in that moment, it felt like to put it down in a piece or to put it down on paper would be to like put that emotion over there, and then I could be done with it. I could like move it off to like another drawer and not have to think about it. It didn't occur to me to necessarily like write a blog post or write a journal entry. For some reason, it clicked in my brain that this person had told me to pitch. So I wrote like a 3-sentence pitch. But even in my mind at the time, I was like, even if she doesn't accept this pitch, even by writing down this experience in 3 sentences and sending it off into the ether, that is a way that I can be like, you wrote it, it's done, it's over. So I literally wrote that pitch and then like dried my eyes and was like, okay. Like, you know what I mean? I was kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm done crying. I kind of like said this thing and it's like out there. It's like outside of me now. And then the next day she wrote back and was like, yeah, I'd love to have this piece. And I was like, oh God, like it was kind of like writing like an angry email and like not realizing that you actually sent it to a person.
Wow.
But she was like, let's do it. And I was like,
and then you did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did it
so
for Lenny Letter.
I said, yeah. And then she was like, how do you feel about naming or not naming your actual employer in this piece? And I actually didn't mention the name of the employer in the piece, but I was kind of like, and again, this is one of those things that like something happened beyond me before I could even say what it was. But I remember being like, well, just to make your life easier, I don't have to name this employer, but just so you know, I'm leaving. And it was like I said it before my brain knew that I was going to actually do it.
Wow.
And she was like, oh, like that's really good for you, I'm glad to hear it, but yeah, like we'll just go ahead and like not mention the name in the piece. So it was like a very like quick like 24-hour period in which like I broke my fear of pitching. I ended up with an assignment based on the pitch that I sent in like a blind rage, and then also decided to leave my job. And then there it was, I like was going to try this freelance thing out basically.
And then from there, you did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a piece you wrote about you begging your mom to let you go and subscribe to 17 magazine. So you
Was,
subscribed to 17 magazine.
yeah.
You know where this is going. This is talking about your wedding.
Yes.
The wedding that went viral.
So actually, I think my mom relented and finally got me my first magazine subscription. Actually, my first ever magazine that I got in the mail was September 2001, and it had Destiny's Child on the cover, 17 magazine. Like, I still remember it. Like, it's probably still at my parents' house. It was like the beginning of my 8th grade year. So I don't know why I had such a passion for magazines, considering I wasn't allowed to have them. I must have been like developing this idea of what they were and what they meant based on what I was seeing on newsstands, because I definitely hadn't opened one until I got one in the mail. So I kind of just always had this idea of like what magazines represented, the fact that they could be, in my mind, a guide to maturity, to elegance, to opulence. Just thinking like if you could just like look past the covers of these magazines, like all the answers are there. So like I was so into the magazine subscription that I had. And then when I got to college and had like my own real like spending money and freedom to move about on my own, would just like buy them constantly. I would say from like the time I was 13 to the time I guess about the time I started the magazine itself, I always felt like I remember like flipping through them and being like, gorgeous, yes, not attainable, that's fine because you're 13. And then like you get to like, you feel like, you need to be like sophisticated and like 16 to get it. So then I get to 16 and I'm like, yes, still not attainable, that's fine. You just need your own, like you need to be like 18, 19. And like every stage of my life I would be like so enthralled by these images, but like slowly came to realize that the aspiration part of it was never meant to dissipate. It's supposed to keep you reaching for
and
something
wanting more.
forever and ever and ever. And I got to like 22, 23, and I was like, oh, this is never going to stop, huh? Like, and I started to kind of like fall out of my love affair with magazines, and like I didn't want to buy them anymore. And I miss that because like there are so many like great things within those pages that aren't necessarily aspirational, but like that like half empty feeling that they leave you with was kind of not worth the good stuff in the middle.
That's true. It always leaves you wanting more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I get, you want to sell the magazines and you want them to buy the next one. But I just felt like there could be a better way, or there could be something that like the entire thing felt useful to you as opposed to like just pieces of it. Quite honestly, because I loved magazines so much that I didn't want to stop buying them at newsstands. I was like, what if I made the thing that I've been dreaming of kind of my entire life? So the idea was that it would be a women's interest magazine for women's actual interests. So like it covered the stuff that women's interest quote unquote magazines cover, but then it also had all the other stuff that doesn't necessarily get covered in them. And then the other aspect of it was that it would feature people that looked like people I actually knew, or were people that I actually knew, because that was another aspect of always feeling like I don't look like that, but maybe I could if I just. And it was kind of like there are people who I know who are my age, who are older than me, who are great as is. And like, what if we just put those people in our pages? So I worked with a woman who I had known at my very first job before Style Like You, who I had always like admired and appreciated her taste. And we just met in my apartment like once a week for months and months and months, and just kind of like talked about what it would look like, what we would do with it, what the pieces would be. And like at a certain point, we also realized, deep in the throes of that imposter syndrome and all that stuff, that like we were doing a lot of planning, but we weren't doing a lot of doing. And we were kind of like, we're going to have to let other people in on this. Like, we're going to have to just ask somebody, like, do you want to write a piece? And we're going to have to just be like, do you want to shoot this story? Because we've mapped this out to like perfection. And now we're scared to move forward. So we just started reaching out to people, and then it kind of worked out. I mean, to be fair, I don't even think that I should apply imposter syndrome to this, because we legitimately did not know what we were doing. It's not that like we had the skills to do this. We were just wigging it.
There's a magic in that though, right?
Yeah,
that when
yeah.
you don't know what you're doing, because if you really knew, you wouldn't do it, because
Yeah,
you wouldn't, you would then know how
absolutely.
much work it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also spent a lot of that time during the initial planning period saving money, because I was like, I don't know how much this costs, but let me just like put away a bunch of money and like pay off some loans and stuff and like prepare for this like thing that we're going to do. So we ended up, the first time around, we didn't know what, well, we knew we didn't want to not pay people. That was one thing we knew for sure. We also didn't know what we were supposed to pay people. So very naively, we reached out to everybody we wanted to work with on issue one and said, this is what we want to do. This is our plan. This is our vision. This isn't a cagey, like, negotiating tactic. We're telling you that we're literally doing this on our own, and we don't know what people want to or should be paid. So please tell us what you would like to be paid, and we will try our best. And like, there were some people who said, I really believe in what you're doing, and I have the ability to do this project for free, so I will shoot this, I will write this for free. There are some people who said, my rate is this, but I understand where you're coming from, you can pay me this. There are some people who said, this is my rate and I can't budge on it. And we were able to pay everybody across that scale everything that they asked for, we
That's
gave.
amazing.
And then moving forward, we were like, okay, well, here's the average of like what people told us. So like from here on out, we will say that we'll pay you X to do a shoot, we'll pay you X to write something this long, we'll pay you something X. So like we've literally just walked out into the world and said, hey everybody, we don't know how this fucking works, but like please level with us and tell us how it works and we'll do our best. And we were able to kind of like meet people in the middle.
It also sounds like that was a wonderful way, a wonderful exercise for you when you did go freelance, knowing what was a reasonable rate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you guys, you published it, and you had a really successful Kickstarter that was fully
Yeah.
funded, and you
Yeah.
published it.
Yeah. So we got 3 issues out at the end of the day. And then the one thing that we never learned to do was find advertising or find a way to make it profitable. We were really good at the creative side of it because we were all creatives. But at the end of the day, like the numbers weren't adding up. And like it was just kind of like I could have kept paying for it out of pocket, but it was just kind of like, like the business side of this isn't working out and we just kind of got to shutter it. But like, I still flip through them sometimes and I'm like, this stuff still holds up quite honestly.
Wow.
Like, and I'm not somebody who's like, yes, I'm amazing, da 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 da. But like, I'm literally like, oh, like this still slaps. Like, I'm like really proud of what we did. It's something that I've gone to job interviews and just handed them like the issues and been like, here's what I can do. Like here's my curation ability, here's my taste level, here's my editing abilities, here's my writing abilities. Like I'm really glad that we were able to get as far as we did, and I'm still really proud of the work that we did.
Oh, that's amazing. Like, especially to have like that Bible, that thing that you created, the babies that you birthed,
Yeah.
that you could present to
Yeah.
everyone. Oh, I love that. Okay, so then you went through Golly. Well, you did Golly,
Mm-hmm.
and then you started freelancing, and then eventually you ended up getting married, and you wrote a piece, right,
Yeah.
for On Our Moon
Yeah.
about your wedding and about
Yeah.
getting married and how
Yeah. It's terrified.
reluctant you were.
Terrified.
Terrified is another
Absolutely
word.
terrified. Yeah.
Yes. When
Yeah.
Cameron proposed.
Yeah.
And so the two of you met at Harvard, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was
Yeah.
across the hall from you.
Across the hall from me. Yeah.
And you both from Harvard stayed together, and you both in New York, and
Mm-hmm.
suddenly he proposed. And in the article you wrote for On Our Moon in April 2018, you wrote from when you met in college, you say, over the next 7 years, we took on the oftentimes grueling task of learning how to love and how to live. We shed versions of ourselves and tried on new personas. At first, molding ourselves to fit like puzzle pieces before learning that it would behoove us to craft identities that needn't rely on each other to exist. We clashed and compromised, tore down blueprints and started from scratch, retreated into a cocoon of our own making, and emerged a bit wiser, a bit surer of our steps as we trekked towards adulthood. I feel like, damn. First, damn. I'm like, yes. Isn't that what it's supposed to be about though? Isn't it
Yeah.
like if you are a couple, if you are you whether you are a couple or you have a relationship, and I feel like your words not only apply to you and Cam, but
Yeah.
I feel like it applies to the relationship that I've decided to craft with my husband, the relationship I've decided to cross with my son, and the relationship I decided to craft with my sister and some of my friends. I feel like in so many ways the relationships that we decide are important to us, you need to have a discussion as to what it's going to look like and how it's a relationship that it's your own, it's not everyone else's, and because it's your own you have to decide what the rules are, you have to
Yeah.
decide what it is, what that relation is going to look like and what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think so many people are looking for their other half, and I feel like I was for a long time too. But actually, somebody in college once told me that like your goal shouldn't be to find somebody who makes you whole, but rather to find somebody that together you equal more than the sum of your parts. And that like really, I mean, I like literally said like borrowed this from this person like in my vows, in my wedding vows, because I was like that like completely changed the way that I thought about being in a relationship, because I was looking for someone to take the parts of me that weren't completed and like click into me, and then with that person I could be a better version of myself. But I was like, that makes so much sense. Like I should be whole on my own and look for somebody who makes, you know what I mean, like who is also whole. Like to be very clear, I should be looking for somebody we're two wholes,
Mm-hmm.
but like when we are put together, we equal more than two. Like we do
Yes.
something better together than we would apart. But if apart, we should both be fine. Like
Mm, I agree wholeheartedly. Were you surprised what your wedding did, like how it just appeared
absolutely,
everywhere? I mean, beautiful
absolutely.
wedding. I mean, your hair was amazing. I was
Thank
like,
you.
that was a TWA, right? Well, no, that wasn't even like, that wasn't the
No,
TWA, but
no,
that was
no,
like,
no.
that was a good fro that you
Yeah,
had
yeah.
there. I mean, it ended up on the cover of
Yeah, it was
Domino
really,
Weddings. Like,
yeah, I'm still shook. I'm like, what the hell is going on?
and then it was also featured on Vogue. Were you
Yes.
expecting that?
No. No, not at all. I mean, I wouldn't have even if I wanted that, I wouldn't have known how to make that happen. Like the whole thing is fucking bizarre to me. No, someone just reached out. Someone reached out and said, "Hey, like I'm an editor at Vogue." And it's funny because she also has her own blog called, the name escapes me now.
Oh, yes.
She's a weddings editor at Vogue, and she also, I think it's Over the Moon is her, what is her wedding website. But she was like, hey, like I saw this pic. I still don't know where she saw the picture. She was like, I saw this picture of you, and we'd love to feature it. Would you answer these questions? And I was like, yeah, sure. But like, I mean, let me recap. Actually, I didn't say, yeah, sure. I was like, oh, this is exciting. Wow, this is like amazing. But also, I was like, I feel like it's not going to go live. Or like, I feel like she's just like doing her due diligence. Or like, maybe it'll go on some other website. Like, I literally was just kind of like in denial the whole time. And like I kind of just answered the questions, and then she was like, great, thanks. And then it like went up on Vogue, and I was like, actually, what the hell is going on? So like I have no idea how the photo got to her or how it like came across her desk. But then after that it kind of just kept snowballing. But like, yeah, the whole thing is insane to me, because especially when you think about how long it took me to get down the aisle in the first place. Like I was just kind of like, oh, like I did not know that this would be the reaction by any means.
No, I mean, I loved it. I loved every piece of it. And it felt like very much like you. It was
Yeah.
not pretentious. It was so, it felt so wholesome, and I don't know if that's even the right word, but it felt wholesome and right. And your dress, your hair, I mean, it was just
Yeah.
all perfect.
I,
And you
I
guys
have to
had
say that
Haitian
that's,
food served from what
yeah.
I.
I think that's the most exciting thing about the whole way that the wedding has kind of taken off is that, like, for me, obviously, it was a wonderful day and there were happy parts and sad parts. And there are things that, like, obviously are, like, so specific to, like, the people that were there that, like, will probably never, like, make it into print. But I think that just the fact that all of the amazing people who contributed their talents to make the day look and taste and sound and feel as wonderful as it does, like I'm going to be like screaming their names from the rooftops for like
Yeah.
years to come because I just want them to have all the clients and all the business and all of the good things that life can offer them because it's just kind of like there's so many people who like, you know what I mean? Like I said, I like that color and I like this and like the planner and the caterer and the person who sold me my dress and you know the venue and like all those people, the lighting people, the DJ, the florist. Like I'm just like trying to like go through the list and like all of them are so amazing and like without any element of that it would have been a completely different day and I just think that they're so good at what they do and I just want them to have all the good things. Yeah.
Oh, wow. It was beautiful. Can you tell me a little bit about like what you've learned about the art of the pitch or anything that you would like to share about freelancing in
Yeah.
terms of what surprised you or some tricks that you've learned that you'd love
Yeah.
to share?
I think one big part of it is that ideas, like good ideas, are evergreen. And like just because you don't hear back from somebody, like it's I didn't know this for a while, but apparently like it's fine to put a deadline on somebody else accepting your idea. Like it's fine to say like, hey, I want to pitch this to you, but like if I don't hear back from you by this time, like I'm going to like give this idea elsewhere, which makes sense. You know what I mean? Like all these things like make perfect sense, but I think that there's so much tied up in the idea of like putting your creativity out in the world for someone else to accept or reject or not necessarily respond to it at all ends up like kind of clouding the like pure logic of this. But like if your bread and butter is to share ideas with the world and then develop them for an audience, well, if you share an idea and you don't hear anything back, like it makes perfect sense to continue sharing that idea with somebody else. Another thing that I've learned is that even at the Vogues and the Times of the world, they rely on great ideas and they don't always come from their own heads and they don't always come from their own networks. So I think just the idea that editors are hungry for ideas is something I never considered. I kind of just assume that like, they just know what they know and they have their roster and they don't need anybody. They don't need little old me to come in with this like teeny tiny idea that like I pitch in my mousiest voice because I don't think it really belongs there. Like everybody's looking for great ideas. And if you have one, enter the room with the confidence that it's a good one. There's a market for your ideas, no matter how much you think you do or don't belong in that marketplace. And two, that like if someone doesn't accept it, you can move on. I also think like just accepting the fact that a no does not end you. In fact, it frees you to again
Go elsewhere.
back to point one, move it to somebody else.
Got
I
it.
used to think that if I got a no, that meant I could never pitch that person again. That they were in rejecting my idea, also saying that like your thought process does not suit us,
Or
and
rejecting
therefore,
you.
yeah. So the fear of a no used to stop me from pitching altogether because I just didn't want to have to deal with the idea that they could tell me no on something. I also think taking people at face value. Again, I used to get invitations to pitch and not do it. I literally thought that it was a thing that somebody said. Like when people say like, oh, we should get together sometime. And like, you were like, no, we shouldn't. But I know that you're just saying, I used to think that like, you should pitch me was that equivalent. And I'd be like, thank you, but no. Like I can tell you don't really want my ideas. Now I know that that's a thing that nobody says because you know what? If you really don't believe in somebody's ability to pitch you something good, you would never invite them to then flood your inbox with ideas that you don't want. So like taking people at face value, if they ask you to do it, they want you to do it.
Well, that's
And also
amazing.
just, the idea that like your pitch might not be perfect, but editors are also willing to work with you and build them into something better. I didn't know that that was an option either. I thought it was a
That's
yes or a
awesome.
no.
So
And
how
if
do
it's
you
a
go
no,
about finding the right editors? I assume that because you're in New York, you're in that space and you meet a lot of people. And it could also be because you're at the wing.
yeah,
And
it
that you
helps.
meet everybody like who goes to the wing. But how do you identify the editors that you want to pitch to?
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've had a lot of good experiences with editors. I will say that in the spirit of knowing that your ideas are valuable and treating them as such, I would say that in situations where I have felt less than 100% comfortable with an editor, I just don't pitch them again. Like, I mean, you do have to make a very real decision when you're in, because usually you won't know until you're already halfway down the path, right? Like you're not going to know at the time that the person accepts the pitch whether or not they're going to be sensitive to you. You might, and you should like take the sign if you can get it that early. But usually you're like in edits, you're going back and forth, and maybe they're asking you for something that you don't feel comfortable with, or they're pushing you to like share something that you don't want to do. And that's a very real decision where you have to weigh the possibilities of like walking away from that check or just going through with it and trying to like protect the part that you want to protect. But I will say that like if you make it through to the end and it wasn't a good relationship, you just don't do it again. And that's basically how I've like treated it.
So
But
is it
I've really had like I've been lucky enough to have really good relationships and good experiences with pretty much all of the editors that I've worked with. But yeah,
so was it you who pitched Al the story of the new YA, or I guess what we
they that
call
was an assignment.
that
They
was an
asked me
assignment.
if
Oh
I
my
was
gosh,
able
that's
to
so
do
up
it.
your alley.
Yeah, she had read my stuff for girls at library and said that she thought that it would be a good fit. And it was a
Oh,
very quick, like, kind of like, can you come tomorrow or, like later this week? We're doing the shoot. And I was like, absolutely, I will
oh
make
my
time for that.
gosh.
But yeah, and that's another fun thing that I never saw coming because, the woman who runs Girls at Library is a friend of mine. And I had pitched her this idea of me just like reading a book every week for a year and writing about it every week. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, it was something that sounded good in theory until I was like, Jesus Christ, I have to write like 50 something essays.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I did, and I loved it, and I loved what came out of it. But like, it's just one of those things where it's like somebody at L is like, "Hey, I loved your work for this," and I'm like, "What?" Like, I kind of just thought that I was like writing into the void. But yeah, people. I mean, this is an editor's entire job is to kind of just
And
have an
find
ear to the
that.
ground and know what people are doing, even if it's not something that has a lot of fanfare attached to it.
Not only were you writing the piece, but Dana Scruggs photographed them. I mean,
Yes.
it's amazing. And so, can you tell me about some of your guilty pleasures when it comes to reading?
Usually what comes up is like trashy novels or like romance or whatever, which I hadn't really ever read until I did this year-long project. And I read a month of romance and like I was kind of like, yes, no, like I get it, but it's not really for me. But like I'll read anything. You know what I mean? Like I'm really not picky. I feel like I don't have any guilty pleasures when it comes to reading.
Cool. Tell us about just your self care routine, or how do you take care of yourself?
It varies. There are days when I do nothing. I mean, I go to Pilates 3 times a week, and I've been working out a lot more, which sometimes doesn't feel like self care because I don't like to work out. But I think just the fact that I've committed to it makes it feel like it is a routine and it is something that is like at the end of the day for my health. So it's funny because it's not the sort of thing that makes me feel like zen and whole, but
Hmm.
like working out consistently, like I hate it, but it is taking care of myself.
Perfect. What's your favorite swear word?
Fuck.
Oh, fantastic. Tell us, like, one thing, what's your favorite thing about working at the wing?
It's every one of them is hyper talented, hyper focused. Talk about like side projects. Everybody has like the most incredible like passions and side hustles and gigs. We just did a Black History Month Black employee talent showcase, and the things that people brought to the table from teaching Pilates to writing to poetry to visual art to talking about their art history thesis. Like I feel especially talking about somebody who worked from home for 6 years and was like, oh, I have to go to an office. I am genuinely excited to be in the office every day because of the people who are there. I'm actually really sad about this quarantine just because I'm like, I miss everybody. Like, everyone's so great.
Well, that's it for now. Just wanted to thank you for coming on and chatting with
Thank you for
us.
having me.
And I'm so excited to continue to see your star rise, Roxanne.